Good morning. Welcome. I'm Laura Little. I'm the director of the Institute for Leadership Advancement at the Terry College. I'm filling in for the dean, who's on his way to Cleary, Georgia, with the Dear One Fellows. So I would like to welcome you to the Terry Executive Education Center and Terry Third Thursday. So happy that you all are able to be here with us this morning. As probably many of you know, Terry Third Thursday is a breakfast event that allows students and alumni to come together and network. Its operations are based in Atlanta, and it doesn't just put itself on, so we want to make sure that we thank the people responsible for this, and so the alumni board, I know, does a lot to get this up and going, so we want to appreciate them. We also want to thank our sponsors. So our corporate sponsor is Synovus, so we want to appreciate them. And our media sponsor is the Public Broadcasting of Atlanta, WABE, so we want to thank them. So to put on your calendars, next month we also have a great speaker, Jesslyn Rollins, on November 17th. This is the CEO of BioLite, and so another 7 a.m., and so please mark your calendars for that great event as well. This morning's presentation will be a fireside chat, and it is my pleasure to introduce our facilitator, Michael Lage. Michael is the Senior Director of Strategy Development for Chick-fil-A. As such, he is responsible for stewarding the company's go-to-market strategy, working with teams across restaurant development, field operations, supply chain, marketing, and innovation. Michael graduated UGA with degrees in finance and marketing, and he was a Leonard Leadership Scholar in the Institute for Leadership Advancement. He also earned his MBA from Harvard. Thank you for being here, Michael. We appreciate it. It is now my pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, Andrew Cathy. Andrew is the Chief Executive Officer for Chick-fil-A, one of the nation's largest family-owned businesses. He's only the third person in the company's history to hold the title of CEO, following in the footsteps of his father and current chairman, Dan Cathy, and his late grandfather and Chick-fil-A founder, Truett Cathy. With extensive experience working in Chick-fil-A restaurants and serving in many support roles, Andrew is committed to continuing Chick-fil-A's path as a healthy, purpose-driven global organization devoted to making a lasting, positive impact on the people and communities it serves. From 2019 until his appointment as CEO, he served as Executive Vice President of Operations, overseeing the selection, cultivation, and development of the company's franchised restaurant owners, and leading the business operations of all Chick-fil-A restaurants. He joined the company's executive committee in 2013 and served as Chief People Officer from 2016 to 2019. Andrew grew up with Chick-fil-A, leading the business and preparing for leadership by watching his father and grandfather. He officially began his Chick-fil-A career in 2005 as operator of the Tyrone Boulevard restaurant in St. Petersburg, Florida. A couple of years later, he joined Chick-fil-A's support center staff as a franchisee consultant and later led franchisee selection for the company. After earning a bachelor's degree in business education at UGA, Andrew completed executive studies at Stanford University as well as the Families in Business program at Harvard. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Cathy and Michael Lage.
All right, well, thank you, Laura, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. As Georgia alum, I think this is a really special treat to be here. So,
very much so.
Excited to spend the time. And Andrew, why don't you just kick us off maybe and share a little bit about your personal background, but also the history of Chick-fil-A, since those are both intertwined.
Well, I'll add there was quite a bit covered in the introduction there about my background, but I'll give you a quick recap of just kind of Chick-fil-A and how we got started. It was started by my grandfather, Truett Cathy, in 1946, but going back a little bit before that, he was born in Eatonton, Georgia, which is just out I-20, and their family were farmers, and there was the boll weevil, which is a beetle that came through the South and just decimated crops. They lost everything that they had, and they moved into downtown Atlanta. There was the first government housing in the state of Georgia, was just there over at Techwood Homes area, and so that's where he grew up, and they were extremely, extremely poor as kids. He had a 6-year-old brother that was walking down the sidewalk one day, just poking a stick in the ground, and it stuck in a crack and the other jabbed in his stomach. They couldn't afford to take him to the doctor, so he died of stomach infections. He had a sister that got polio as a kid, which was treatable by medications, but they couldn't afford the medicine, so she was in a wheelchair wheelchair her whole life. So they were really struggled. And his dad was just a bum, didn't do anything. And so his mom kind of used their place as a boarding house, and would have people kind of like bed and breakfast. And so that's where he really learned the value of work, because everybody had to contribute to even having food on the table. So he learned how to get in the kitchen and help his mom, and started selling newspapers, and eventually Coca-Cola's door to door, just to kind of help bring in some money for the family. And so that was honestly the root of how he thought about service and taking care of his guests. Is he won a lot of awards with the Atlanta Journal and then the Constitution. There was a day and night paper at that point. And so he ran routes and won all kind of awards. And he really tried to focus on putting things where people wanted it. They wanted it in the mailbox. He knew this customer liked it this way. If he knew another customer liked it right at the front door, he placed it there. And so that was some of the roots of his aspects of learning just hospitality. Well, he goes off to the war and then came back, and one of his brothers named Ben, they were best friends and had always talked about going into business together, and decided to go into the restaurant business. They looked at a franchise that was happening at that point, and it just didn't work. They kept changing the deal on them, and so they backed off and said, let's just do it ourselves. So that's when they decided to buy the little place in Hateville, Georgia, where the original location was, and opened in 1946. About 18 months after they opened, it was open 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. So it was really intense. And right across the street was Ford Automobile Plant, where the Porsche facility is now. And about 18 months after they opened the business, Ben, who loved to fly planes and had gotten a pilot's license, and they had another brother named Horace that liked to fly as well. So it was common on a weekend that they would rent a plane and just go fly up to Chattanooga or different places. One weekend they got into some bad weather and the plane crashed and they both died. And so here he is left with this restaurant, lost his best friend and brother, and he was stuck with having to, not stuck, but he was the one running the show at that point. So he rented a one bedroom right next to the restaurant, and that's where he lived. And so he often talked about how, if a grillman didn't show up or he could hear a lot of gravel happening during the night, he'd get up and go back, and talked often about having to work 30 plus hours straight on the grill when people didn't show up for work, because that's just what you had to do to keep it going. So he had it, it was not easy kind of coming up for him. Eventually opened a second restaurant in the early 1950s, and then tried some other concepts, tinkered around with an idea of a chicken sandwich in the early 60s, and really kind of perfected it, but he had been burned with trying to run two restaurants. He said it was just too hard, so he didn't want to open another one. But he had a sister named Gladys that had a little gift shop in Greenbrier Mall, which is just kind of in the south western part of the city. And she said, Trick, you've got to sell your sandwiches here. And so she was a spark plug. She was probably about 2 feet tall. And she's pretty short, well, taller than that, but she was really short, but man, she was a bulldog. And so she, before Trudy even knew, started negotiating a deal with the mall landlords out in California to try to get them a site in the mall, which was really unheard of, because food in the malls, people didn't want that at that point. So there was Piccadilly Cafe were associated with some malls, but that was the only option. So for him to open a restaurant in a mall was very, very different. So they did open that first one in 1967, and then gradually continued to open up more locations in the malls. And then we started getting into freestanding restaurants in the late 80s. Early 80s, we saw this big shift in retail happening when the economy shut down and malls weren't really developing as fast, and knew that we needed to evolve as a business as well. And so we've primarily grown through those vehicles over the last several decades. And as you mentioned, my grandfather, he did pass away 2014. My dad stepped in as CEO. So he's one of 3 in his generation. And then in my generation, there's 12 of us in generation 3. And in generation 4, we've got, I think it's like 36 or 37, something like that. It's like a gasometer. It changes every day. It feels like somebody's having a kid. So I don't even know what that number will end up being. So there's a lot of stuff we can get into if you want, but just on the intentionality of how to develop family and to try to keep this thing going. Personally, for me, I grew up playing sports. I wrestled the most with what I wanted to do career-wise in 8th grade, and had a coach that had a huge impact on my life. I love business. I always had stuff for sale as a kid, legal things, but sold. I would get mistletoe, shoot mistletoe out of a tree and wrap little ribbons around it and sit out in front of the grocery store while I was shopping and selling stuff, or selling stuff at school, and but just always had a knack for business. But my coach had such a big impact on me. And I remember into 8th grade, I'd had some success in sports, and I thought, man, I'd worked so hard and I'd set some records and things, and I thought, somebody else is going to break that. And I put all that work and effort in it. And I was sitting there thinking about the goals that I wanted to have by the time I graduated high school. And it really started making me think about what really matters. And then I started thinking about the impact the coach was having on me and how much I had changed as a person because of his impact. And I thought, man, if I could have half the impact he's having, I'd feel like life's a success. So I really kind of wrestled through it. Did I want to go and teach high school and coach, or did I want to go into business? And I thought if I go and teach high school, then it'll either confirm that's kind of my passion, or it'll confirm the business is where I need to be. And so I went to Samford my freshman year. I had some sports stuff I was wanting to pursue and had some injuries and things, so put sports to the side. I took off from school for a little while at that point. We were opening stores in South Africa in the late 90s, and so I moved to South Africa and helped open up our third location. And then finished that, came to the University of Georgia, which is one of the best decisions I've ever made. But really, really did love my time at Georgia, and just a fantastic experience, and so proud to be alumni of the university. Ended up going back to high school, taught finance, economics, accounting, coached football and track. But it did eventually feel just the real call to come into the business. And for whatever reason, we feel like God's given us this business and we need to use it in a way to help people and to have a positive impact. And as I was wrestling through with, could I say at the end of my life I've done everything I could with what I'd been given? Without coming into the business, I didn't feel like I could say I had. And so that was kind of that transition point for me. And you kind of heard some of the other pieces. Started off as an operator and then worked in operator selection and then people department and then operations and then moved into this role just about a year ago. So that's it on the work front. Personal front, we've got 4 kids, 11, 9, 7, and 4. So it is logistics craziness right now as we're getting into fall. This fall, I didn't insert myself into the planning of our calendar as early as I should have on the personal front. I'd planned it on work stuff. Dana helps keep me in line. But I was talking to my wife about, all right, we got to get them to pick which ones they're going to do. She said, well, I've already signed them up for all of them. So we got some kids playing 3 sports this fall. So it's like, it's not, we won't do that again, I don't think. We've learned our lessons, so they're a lot of fun, but that's my outside work.
Well, one of the things I appreciate is that Andrew is a leader who's dedicated and committed to his family, and so you're always running from one thing to the next, but that's a great example for each of us. Hey, I should have started. How was breakfast?
Do that better?
Do we need
Okay.
microphones?
Do you think?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is
sure.
it cutting in and out? Okay.
Sorry, excuse us. There's one for you.
So I should have asked this morning, how was breakfast? Was it good? Okay. That's great. That's what matters. If you have feedback, let us know. We always want to make it great. So, hey, let's get into that, Andrew. I think you've been passionate about the operation from the beginning, and one thing that I think is fascinating is that you came into Chick-fil-A, started as an owner-operator down in St. Pete, and then you came in to the support center. Of course, everything we do at the support center is supporting our local franchise operators, and so starting with that experience I think is so interesting, and then you came in to lead talent, to lead field operations, then ultimately join our executive team and now become CEO. Maybe share with the group some of the key defining leadership lessons along your career journey.
It goes back further than that. Can you hear me? I can't tell if this is on or right. It goes back further than that. Growing up in the business, it was from the time I was born in regards to just inundated with it. And so I was born in the late 70s. We were opening malls, and it was really intense. Between 1980 and 1982, that 2-year period was extremely, extremely difficult. They had doubled the size of the business in that 2-year period. So we went from 100 locations to 200 locations. The economy was tanking. Interest rates were, of course, around 20%. And, of course, we're experiencing now, this is the closest thing to early 1980s we've experienced. So it was a really, really tough time. But Dad was on the road a lot, and he just had to. We didn't have a big staff, and so he was gone a lot. So I traveled a lot with him as I got 4, 5, 6 years old, started getting those opportunities, and have so many memories of, like, I was so short, but couldn't do a whole lot of tasks, but they could stack 2 pickle buckets on top of each other, and I could stand up there and just fillet chicken. And so that was one of the things I could do. And then when, at that point, you had to memorize verbatim the description of every product in order to work out front. So once I got a little bit older and had memorized everything, I was able to sample nuggets on the lease line, which I didn't realize at that point until I did it, that you got a lot more attention from girls that were a little bit older. I thought, this is a little bit better than working in the back. So I preferred that whenever I could. But traveled a lot. So those just the memories of that, and so many conversations with operators, it just helped. So that was a big lesson along the way. And then going into teaching and coaching, one of the big takeaways from that is You could teach one class and it goes off without a hitch. They get it, catch it, and it's fantastic. The very next period, it's like you're teaching a foreign language. Like they're just looking at you like crickets, and you can't even, it's the exact same lesson you just did. So learning to pivot and to adjust to crowds and groups, to resonate, and then on the individual levels as well. You know, we all learn differently, and that was such a vital thing. I didn't realize at that point. A lot of times we have experiences, we don't realize how much it's helping you till after the fact as you look back. But that teaching and coaching had such a huge, profound impact on the way I look at trying to connect with people and find out the way that they operate so that I can kind of relate as well. So that was a big one. And then there's different things along the way at Chick-fil-A. Moved into a role that was pretty big at one point. I have to be kind of careful, too many details on that one just yet. But moved into an area that was really kind of falling behind. And it was, I had to make some really tough decisions. And it was not an easy thing to do, but I learned a lot from it. And I feel like that, you know, that's one of our biggest growth opportunities any of us have, is to be willing to step in things that are beyond your comfort zone. And I think if you feel comfortable moving into something, it's like, oh, I can do that, you're probably not going to have a big opportunity to grow. But if you're willing to step out into things that feel way beyond what you're capable of doing, you'll find a way to get through it. You'll spend time with others that have been there and done it, and just the learning that takes place is, just can't emphasize it enough. So if you're ever given opportunities in work or even in serving on social boards and things, and you feel out of your comfort zone, it might be the actual thing that you do. So I would encourage you just to lean into that.
Thanks, Andrew. So, of course, Chick-fil-A is a privately held, family-owned business, which makes us very, very unique. But talk about why that's important to you and your family, and what are you actively doing to ensure that the business can stay healthy across generations?
Well, we do want to keep this thing going, and we know that anything can happen to a business. There's external forces, economy and so forth, that could cause a business to go down, or internal decisions that are off, and you end up not staying relevant. So we really kind of hold it with an open hand. I'd say the real purpose is really what drives a lot of the ways that we operate. But it goes back to, again, that period in the early 1980s when it was so tough. The business, as we doubled at that point, sales started flattening off. They went into some malls because that's the only thing we were open at that point that were probably, they shouldn't have, but it was an opportunity. And because they weren't open on Sunday, so that limited some of the opportunities they had. But they were really struggling. We had bought a facility to build a corporate office, had taken on a lot of debt, and so it was a really, really uncomfortable time. So our senior team got away, went up to Lake Lanier for a weekend, had all these empty 3-ring binders, and planned to come back with big plans to save the company. And they spent the whole weekend, and they only came away with 2 sentences. And it ended up being our corporate purpose. And it has been really our North Star since. And so our corporate purpose is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us, and have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And it really is the way that our ethos and the way that we operate is we want to really be good stewards of this. We want to build and continue to grow. We want to be wise in the way that we steward our people and our resources, but we want to do it to help other people. And we're in a business, so you got to stay profitable. You want to be excellent at what you do, but we know that that creates opportunities to help. And there's just so many opportunities to do that, which we're really, really passionate about. I got off on corporate purpose. What was your question?
Family business.
Yeah, sorry.
That's a good thing to go off on. So,
Sorry. And so the family business side, it takes a lot of work to keep it going in a family business. And as business grows, you just think of your professional side, things get more complicated the further you kind of get into careers. And as business grows, the same thing happens in the family. As I mentioned, my dad's generation, there was 3. There's 12 in my generation. But when you add in in-laws, there's like 23 now. And then there's 30-something in Gen 4. And the oldest is about to turn 18 in December, so she'll start attending our family meetings. And so you have to be real intentional about it. And so we really spent some time in the early 2000s, spent time with John Davis, who was a professor at that point at Harvard. He's moved his program to MIT now. But really realized the importance of setting up structure and governance. And so we found, for example, we weren't doing anything as a family, gotten people spread out and gone, and we just kind of quit doing holidays together, and we just saw each other at work events. And so we started intentionally building things into the calendar. So we have a week in Florida in July. We can't talk business, everybody comes, and most people can stay for the whole, or if not, they can stay for a good part of it. But it's just those touch points to create conversations and relationships, because we'll get in discussions and decisions that have to get made. We don't always agree on what the decision should be, but if you don't have that deep-seated element of trust with each other, it makes that challenging. But even in the last couple of years, we've taken on another big project about 5 or 6 years ago to step it up even more. So we've created more committees and different things to really help on the overall aspect. It might feel a little over-orchestrated, but you got to invest that resource and that emphasis on it. And then you got to start teaching the next generation. So I'm Pat. I love business. I've always loved it. So I teach it to our kids. So every night when I'm home, not traveling, I'll read to them. And so I'll read a verse of scripture. I'll read a business book, and then they can pick a book of their choice. And so teach basics of finance and how businesses work. There's so many great books that are good for kids, even kind of in that 3, 4, 5-year-old kind of range. And it's just fun. My daughter's now 11. She's the oldest, and is so far the one that seems to really kind of take it to it. So she's always selling things. I wouldn't let her sell anything until she could write out a basic profit and loss statement. So she had to learn about how you
She's day trading now too.
not day trading,
Okay.
but she is doing stocks. So that is fun. We'll sit in bed almost every night. She'll say, "Dad, can we look at CNBC?" So I'll pull my app up and we'll talk about the market that day, and we'll look at charts and just talk. She's really fascinated with it. So anyway, I could go on many stories with her, what she's been doing. Some things aren't good. She forced her brothers to come to her room because she had homework she had to read, and she started charging them every few minutes to listen. And she wouldn't let her read. And so my son came to me as a Sunday afternoon. He said, "Dad, can I borrow $5?" So I won't give him money. I let him borrow it and have to pay back. And I said, "Son, why do you need $5 right now?" He said, "Because Palmer's making us come to her room and charging us because she's wanting to save some more money to buy more stocks." And so her sister's about to learn a business term called refunds, because she's not going to charge her family to do things like that. So, anyway.
That's fantastic. Well, and a note back to the corporate purpose, one thing I've been struck by is it's written right out on a rock right outside our office. And I know there's some Chick-fil-A staffers here in the room.
Chick-fil-A, I see some. Would you just raise your hand so others can see? Got a few other Chick-fil-A.
And I bet, we won't go around the room, but I bet we could go around the room and they could quote the purpose verbatim. And that's what I think what makes it so special is it's not just something that's on a rock, but it's really written on everybody's memory and hearts and sort of guides our decisions moving forward. Well, hey, speaking of really important things to our business, the owner-operator model is sort of the linchpin of what we do at Chick-fil-A. Everything happens by local restaurant operators and their team members. Talk about why that's really important to you and any other reflections on what operators do.
It's been our business model, and it is really one of, outside of the recipe of that coder for the chicken sandwich, it's the second most important piece of our business. And he goes back to the early 60s. He had 2 restaurants, one burned down. He tried to build a new concept he thought was the way of the future. It was more of a fast food. You ordered at a counter, sit down, and people hated it. It was just ahead of his time. They're like, "We want full service." So he ended up selling it, and he was so burned with it, he wasn't going to open another restaurant. So that's when he had the chance to tinker around with the idea of a chicken sandwich. And so when his sister talked him into opening and trying one more time to open a restaurant at Greenbrier Mall, he knew he had to do something different. He couldn't himself run multiple restaurants. He knew how hard it was. If he wasn't struggling in one store, he's having problems in the other. So he had to come up with a model. And so right after he opened, he came up with a model we still use today. And so it's an individual, and the amount's a little different now. You have to invest $10,000, back then it was much less, to go into business for us. And we own the assets and the facilities, so we have our own real estate department, identify, build, and own the locations. But then the operator, the way that their income works is they're self-employed, they hire their own team members, and then they pay Chick-fil-A 15% of gross sales and 50% of the net profits. So they get to keep the other 50% as their personal income. So it gives them a great opportunity to have a good income. Average operator income's close to $800,000 now for a location, which is not bad for a $10,000 investment. And so it's just been huge. And what's been so valuable about that is we really trust our operators. It's for somebody that can get through and make it all the way through. It's about a year-long interview process. We get about 120,000 people applying, and we're opening about 150 stores a year. So it's very, very competitive to get that opportunity. But we put so much emphasis on it because we know we're not only turning over several $1 million facilities to somebody, but we're turning over our name and reputation, which we value even more. And we know that somebody can either take it and use it for good, or they could damage it as well. And so we really want to know who we're going into business with. And we want them to really know what they're potentially getting into. And so we try to talk them out of it, along the way during the interview process, just because if you're not careful, people can look at things with rose-colored glasses and think it's going to be all, easy, and it's not. And so anyway, so that's kind of our model that we've had, and it helps really push those decisions to the front lines. Those operators are trusted with so much, and they're able to kind of make the calls on so many things. We feel like that's actually able to help drive sales and stay relevant to each individual communities. They have different needs.
Yeah, we. I know if you're involved or familiar with franchise businesses, sometimes the relationships between franchisor and franchisee can be really, really tense, and it's not without a conflict at Chick-fil-A. But one thing I was struck by is we had our annual staff meeting a couple weeks ago, and we had hundreds of operators fly in from different parts of the country just to come say thank you to what we do, which was so cool and such a testament to the men and women that lead Chick-fil-A restaurants, because they're the ones that are actually working all the magic. So, well, Andrew, talk about, I've heard your dad talk about time being timely but timeless. You're sort of leading a business that's built on a lot of heritage and a lot of rich cultural background with everything that your grandfather did, but now you want to lead us into the future, and obviously the marketplace doesn't stop evolving and changing. How do you balance being timeless and timely moving forward?
It's good. Part of it is the timeless part. It kind of goes back to the ethos and our corporate purpose, and that won't change. In the way that we look to care for people and help, it's just a core of who we are. But the methods and the ways that you do business have to change and evolve. Whether it's menus or elements of service that change, you have to constantly be in this evolution. And so you have to be in this constant state, kind of toggling back and forth between what's immediate now and the challenges that a business is going through, and then also being able to toggle into what are you doing now that's going to help you for the future, and ensuring that. So there's this, in leadership, there's this balance that you have of making sure you're taking care of what needs to be done now, but at the same time investing the foundations for a strong future going forward. So we're doing a lot on that. Different things such as, like, one of the things we're having to do is build out our own distribution network, which was not something we thought we'd have to do 10, 15 years ago. But our distribution partners just aren't able to keep up with our volumes, and so we're having to invest massive amounts of money in that, which isn't really generating revenue, but it's just a cost of doing business that we have to do. But we also are doing a lot of things on the innovation side and doing things. I'm excited about opportunity for delivery and all the different aspects of it. We've got some location that's doing drone delivery we're able to test, and so it's delivering Chick-fil-A sandwiches via drone, autonomous vehicles. So there's just a lot of fun things that we're testing as well that could be way out there. I mean, half of them, 3/4 of them won't work, but you can find something that really does that could be potentially, another major growth curve for you. And so it's important to always lean forward. The temptation for any organization is, as it grows and potentially experiences success, is you can develop this protectionist mindset where you look at what got you to where you are today and you just hold on to it and say, this is the way it'll always be. I mean, you can look through, love studying business history, but a litany of businesses that had that challenge, and they kind of fall irrelevant. I mean, one prime example is Kodak, opened in the 1860s, dominant. I mean, it had, in the 1970s, 85% of all camera sales and 90% of all film sales in the U.S. Top 5 brand up and through the 90s, and where are they now? They're gone. And the reason for it is they actually, some people say, oh, they didn't jump into digital cameras. They actually developed the first digital camera, late 1970s. But they said, no, people will always want film. And so they held on to it, and they didn't evolve and change. And so, we all have to realize that we got to change. It doesn't matter what's working, but you got to be willing to continue to evolve and change if you want to stay relevant going forward. So we're trying to do our best to continue to lean forward and look towards the future.
Thankfully, people being hungry for lunch is pretty timeless, but the way in which we get to them, that will continue to evolve over time. I think it'd be interesting for the group. We talk a lot about leadership, and specifically servant leadership at Chick-fil-A. Maybe share with the group a little bit more, kind of our perspective on what it means to be a great leader at Chick-fil-A.
I don't have COVID. I'm kind of coughing a little bit. I've had a cold. We had fall break and went to Disney, so it's ramification of taking 4 kids to Disney. I've had several tests this week, so I'm good. So if I cough a little bit, don't worry. Yeah, on the leadership side, we kind of have a way that we look at leadership, and we really know that as we study leaders, that the absolute best leaders are ones that have a real service mentality. And so the way that we talk about it is serve is our kind of leadership model, SERVE. So the first thing that a great leader has to do is they've got to be able to see and shape the future. You have to constantly be able to cast that vision of where you're going as an organization to get people to really buy into it. So that's the first, is see and shape the future. The second is E, engage and develop others. So you've got to constantly as a leader be developing yourself and developing those that you lead. If a business is growing, pick a percentage. If a business is growing 15%, as a leader, a good gut check for you is, am I growing at least at 15% of my leadership? Am I reading and studying and spending time with people that are further down the road or leading bigger businesses? But you have to, as a leader, continually think about your growth rate. And are you comfortable, or are you continuing to kind of push and grow as a leader? So the first is see, shape the future. Second is engage and develop others. The third is reinvent continuously. And you've got to be in this constant state. I talked about innovation just a minute ago, but constantly be in the state of reinventing yourself in the business that you lead. The V is value results and relationships. If you actually sat and thought about it for a minute, you probably, all of us, are lean more towards one or the other of that. We're a little bit more on the relational side, and then some others are more on the results side. Let's just get it done, let's accomplish. But good leaders are able to really, even though that they might lean one towards the other, they have enough self-awareness of it. But you got to be able to have good relationships with the ones that you lead, but you also have to be able to get results. And so that balance of that is really important as well. And then the V is that, see, shape the future, engage, develop others, reinvent continuously, value results, relationships, and embody the values. And so that's incredibly
He doesn't
important.
have notes. He's just ripping it off. So it's pretty good.
But engage in embody the values. And it's really, really important that you hold on to the core of a business. And you've got to continue to talk about it to really reinvest into the culture. We're spending a lot of time right now, organization, talking about culture. I'm doubling down on the importance of it right now, especially as we come out of what we've been through the last 2.5 years. It's been crazy. I mean, the business, luckily we were able to continue to grow, but it was tough, as it's been tough for everybody. And, being remote for a lot of it, I really feel like it's been like an endurance race. It's been like challenge and problem after the next. And from a culture standpoint, it's felt like we've gotten a little dehydrated. And so I'm talking a lot about the importance of rehydration. Just as a marathon runner has to hydrate along the way during a race, in business, you've got to intentionally invest and hydrate your culture along the way to be at your best. And so there's a lot of things that we're doing right now to really kind of double down and invest in culture.
So I know there's some students in the room. You all are probably developing personal leadership plans. I mean, that's the leadership development model we use at Chick-fil-A. When we're developing what's our plan to develop and grow in the year ahead, I mean, it's really using that model. Maybe you could build a little bit more on that, Andrew. You've interviewed countless potential staff members, countless potential operators. When you're across the table from someone assessing their candidacy, what are the couple things that you're looking for out of potential leaders at Chick-fil-A?
There's multiple facets, obviously, that you're looking for. But I'd say a couple of key ones. One is a growth mindset. And as you spend time with people, you can really get a sense of who they are. We do multiple interviews. And so, like I said, for operators, even staff, they come through a lot. And we really want to get a chance to truly get to know them, because somebody can show up great in one meeting and then interview them again, it's like a totally different person. And so that chance to really spend time with each other. But somebody that has a growth mindset, which means that they just got that orientation to continue to grow and learn, and they got a track record of it. And so a lot of the interviews that we do, it's not about what they think about the future, but what have they done up until that point, and how are they growing and learning? Because if they're, as a leader, growing and learning, you're going to have that tendency to grow and lead and develop those that you lead. So that growth mindset, I think, is really important. The development piece, as I mentioned, I think is really important as well for that they're continuing to invest and develop people. And I'd say a third one is really just that service orientation and hospitality. Whether you're on a corporate staff side or whether we're in restaurants, we all need to have that element of hospitality. Because on the corporate side, if we can take care of each other, it gives us a better energy to really help our operators. Because we talk about, we don't have a single register at the support center. And so if you're not selling chicken, you better be helping somebody that is. And so that element of working towards service, and do they have more of a service orientation versus what's in it for me, is really, really important. So I think those are a couple right off the top.
Well, we're going to open it up for Q&A in just a minute. So if there are questions, would love to hear from the group. But Andrew, maybe touch one more time just on the crazy pace of change that we're in the middle of in the marketplace. It just feels like we're moving into warp speed. How do you think about keeping Chick-fil-A relevant into the future for customers and other? Is there anything that we're doing now that you're particularly excited about? I mean, don't share anything that we can't let out into the open yet. But
I mentioned a couple earlier, just with drone deliveries and autonomous vehicles, and we're testing different products. Some plant-based products that are incredibly good. We just don't have the capacity in restaurants right now to push some of our new products we've kind of got on the ready. Other things that we're doing, I think, one on the delivery side, I think is going to be game-changing, is we've created our own technology. We've got this holding system. It looks a little bit Yeti-ish kind of containers, but they have microchips in it, and they measure the moisture content and temperature. And so we're able to deliver waffle fries with meals, and they taste just as, 20 minutes later, they taste just as fresh as if you just walked away from the counter and eaten. And we can't get enough of the chips, so there's some challenges, but the potential there for that is game-changing. We think about getting, because we probably all tried, or at least probably some of us are more frequent than others in using delivery. But there's this, or at least for me, I have this expectation that I'm going to lower the bar a little bit, when you get food delivered. It's going to be cold, it's just not going to be quite as good. But thinking about, we're really pushing the needle on how can we make that experience just as fresh and good as if you came and got it from the store. So really excited about some of those innovations as well.
yeah, we don't want to trade off on convenience or quality. We want to have both at 100%. So, well, great. I think we have some time for Q&A if there are questions in the room for Andrew.
So as a young executive hoping to move into a CEO position one day, what would your advice be for someone transitioning into that role? What are the differentiators that I would need as a CEO versus a COO? What are the differences leading the company versus kind of guiding?
I would say a couple of things. I wouldn't let it be the focus. It can be distracting if there's a certain position that you're truly focused on. I'm going to do it no matter what. But really focusing on, I'm doing the best job that I possibly can do with whatever you've been given at that point. So I think that's most important. And then the other piece of it is that constant learning and spending time with people that are in that role. And so I think it's in any level of the organization, if you want to grow and learn, it's better to spend time with people that are maybe 2 or 3 levels above you, whether it's in your business or in other businesses as well. So you kind of start getting in that mindset of how you would actually grow and lead as well. And so spending time with people that are further along is just so important. Having mentors from a development piece, I'd say those are right off the top of my head.
Yeah, great question. Right here.
Andrew, nice to meet you. I'm Andrew Patillo, so Andrew as
Yep,
well.
I can remember that one.
But I'm just absolute pleasure to have you here and to get to hear you speak. I'm curious. Customer service is something that I've been passionate about my whole life. I started working at a grocery store in high school and spent 3 years learning to work with customers and all of that. And through the years, I feel as though I've noticed a continual deterioration of customer service just throughout society, frankly. And I'm so curious because every time I go into a Chick-fil-A store, I grew up north, and was blown away going into the stores, was blown away with the passion that your customers have for the business. So I'm really curious to hear how you guys go about, I guess, for one, inspiring great customer service at your organization, and then 2, more broadly, how you communicate to shareholders and others with a vested interest in the business, why customer service is important.
Well, luckily, we don't have any shareholders outside of just the family. So we don't have any
Stakeholders,
others.
I guess, is a better way to put that.
But on the service piece, it honestly for us, it goes back to that selecting the right operator, because we are technically a franchise, which means that we have to be hands-off on the people side of things. And so they've got to have a really, really, really strong track record of leading teams. Most stores have at least 100 team members, and so they've got to be really, really good at developing people. And so that is one of the absolute most important things for an operator, is that they've got that track record, because it's vitally important. So if we get the right operator that has that kind of that service mentality orientation and has that strong track record of developing people, we feel like they got a higher probability of success. So our chips, our bet really is on that operator making that right selection, because of corporate side we have to be hands off from the team member to avoid joint employment situations. And so, but it's vitally important to continue. And we talk a lot about service, and it's very fundamental in many ways. You think about the restaurant business, people want a clean environment, they want fast and accurate service, they want genuine hospitality. And so there's small little things that we can do from a service piece. Just pause long enough to really kind of connect with somebody for just a second, share a smile, can just brighten somebody's day. And it's to be some of the little things that we might think that don't really matter that much, that actually make significant difference for people.
Thank you for speaking.
I'll add to that. You know, we of course have benchmarked organizations across industries around customer service and hospitality. We've done so much research to try and understand how do you continually deliver great customer experience and service to customers. And one of the things that came back is really, really simple, but operators keep telling us too, is that cared for people care for people. And so operators start by investing and serving in their teams, and then that just translates consistently, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, with the crucible of the past 2.5 years or so in the stores, what have you seen is something that you've kind of stopped doing that say, hey, we didn't really need to do that, and then what have you said, no, we absolutely have to do that as things reopen?
One is we knew that delivery and the on-demand economy was going to be our third wave. We talked about growing it from malls, then it was freestanding restaurants, and we knew that this next one was on-demand economy. Really, it started with Amazon, 2008 financial crisis. They were already around, but the financial crisis, it's interesting if you look back at retail, major shifts in the economy like that usually have a drastic impact on the way that retail works. You go back in the 1980s, even before that, 60s or so, as people moved away, started going into more of the malls. Just major shifts based on the economy. So 2007-08 financial crisis really started to accelerate that as big box retailers were slowing down, developing those. And so it started growing. So we started, and Michael led the work on our app. And so we really started pouring a lot into that a number of years ago. We started thinking about delivery and starting to work on it. So we were already kind of working on some of those a little bit. But we didn't know, obviously, it was going to be accelerated at the rate that it was. So fortunate, again, going back to innovation, we were tinkering and working with some of these things. We had no idea how important for our livelihood it was going to be. And so it just greatly accelerated. Love surfing. I worked in our office in California for a few years. And I think surfing's a great analogy of it, because you've got to be able to, in surfing, pick the right wave. There's different waves coming, and then you've got to have enough momentum to catch it. So you've got to start paddling before the wave gets there. If you wait in business until the wave gets on you, a lot of times it'll just pass by or chew you up. And so I think it's so important to continue that innovation piece. So the aspect of just the shift in hospitality, of the expectation of getting things where I am versus always having to go to a location, it just transcends into every aspect of life now. And so figuring out delivery, we don't have it all figured out. We really see the potential in just Chick-fil-A doing its own delivery and not using third parties, and we've got about 700 stores that are doing that. But we don't have it all figured out because it's still so new. There's so many infrastructure and things that you've got to invest in. But I'd say that's been one of the biggest shifts that we've had coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, right here.
Hey, Andrew, Michael, thank you so much for the talk. One question I have is, what you see a lot today is huge labor vacancies, right? People talk a lot about the Great Resignation. I think the latest stats I saw was like 2 open jobs for every 1 job seeker. What is Chick-fil-A's secret to attracting talent in the current labor market?
Labor market is challenging. We're seeing it across the board. Particular roles on the corporate side, especially like technology roles or engineers, are just really difficult to find. On the team member side, it's challenging as well. I would say in the last 4 or 5 months, though, I've noticed, just because I spend a lot of time in our restaurants, travel just about every single week, spending time. And what I have noticed in the last few months, it feels like we've actually kind of hit a bottom and we're starting to kind of come up because the labor challenge is not quite as significant with operators as I've spent time with across the country as it was earlier. Part of it is just the extra emphasis and being willing to look at compensation as an investment, not a cost on the profit loss statement. And we can naturally think of it as a cost, but you got to look at it as an investment of, I'm going to hire somebody at a higher rate, and it's actually going to help everybody else because you got enough people. If you're understaffed, it just makes the people that you have so much harder to take care of. And so for a lot of operators, they really shifted the way that they thought about the value proposition of employment and what they offered with all kinds of different benefits, really stepped up what they were willing to compensate people. And a lot of operators really shifted the way that they did how many hours they gave people based on what they want. So I know a number of operators moved to 3 12-hour days because their team actually preferred that, and they got 4 days off. And so it worked for him in that restaurant. And so there's just different nuances, I think, that are so important. But the most important is that you show that personal connection. And that gets back to that operator again is if they're really invested in their people, you see retention so much higher than other locations. So that investment of that time of that individual feeling like, they care for me really makes a difference.
And this wasn't the original intent, but it turns out that in the restaurant and retail business, being closed on Sunday is a really nice talent recruitment and retention benefit to be able to kind of have that break.
It is nice for high school, college kids. That they know that all right, at least one weekend day I don't have to work. Because a lot of their jobs you have to work both days on the weekend. So that does help.
Yeah, one
Well,
back
I appreciate the fact you're closed on Sunday, but as your year-over-year sales increase, being closed that 1 day a week, you're giving up like $1 billion. Do you face headwinds? Is that a challenge or no?
We never look at it
Yeah.
because it's just not something we would ever entertain doing.
Yeah.
We just feel like it's so important just to have that day and let people have a day off is just vitally important. So sure, we're probably losing some sales there, but there's also a business aspect of limited availability drives demand as well. And so we feel like it definitely helps a little bit on Monday, I didn't do it the day before. And so, yeah, it's not anything we would ever change.
here.
You talked about leadership today, and our teams are discussing strengths as well. So when you think about generations, your grandfather, your father, you, all, great leadership qualities, but do you find that you have different strengths that you brought to Chick-fil-A in different ways?
I think there are, and some of it, we'll continue just to learn along the way is more time in the role. But one of the things that I did learn, I'd say it really came to fruition for me was in college is I need to be my own person. And, there was a lot of external, my parents were great. They're like, do what you feel like you're called to do, and whether it's in the business or not. But there were a lot of external things of putting the pressure of like, man, you got big shoes to fill. And, with your grandfather and then your dad. But really kind of got comfortable realizing I can stay rooted in the ethos of who we are, but, I'm created uniquely as we all are, and we've got to be our own person. So I feel like there's some traits of my grandfather. I'm pretty entrepreneurial. I've started other businesses as well. And so we've got that, I'd say, in common. But the commonality that we all have is just that dedication to, again, going back to that corporate purpose and what we stand for is really, really important. So,
With time, how are we on time? A couple more questions?
Hello, thank you so much for speaking with us today. My name is Crystal Ivy, and a question that I have for you, especially being so successful within the franchise restaurant business, and just the ancestors maybe the drive-through or the delivery service, but as you think about ways in which you see the future for Chick-fil-A and what you want to do next to kind of be that next level of growth that you spoke about, is that delivery service or are you thinking about other things?
domestic is definitely one of the ways that we see a lot of opportunity. Just open up existing restaurants. We don't have that many locations. We've got about 2,800 locations right now across the U.S. So there's a lot of growth opportunities domestically, but we are starting to get into international. And so we've opened a few stores in Canada, not fully international, but Puerto Rico earlier this year. Opened in Hawaii here a couple of weeks ago. And starting to look at potentially Europe, and then we've got some staff that we've hired in Asia as well to start working on some opportunities there. So that's, we feel like, another longer term. That's really, again, that toggling back and forth between now and the future. And that is a real future play. It's a massive investment to go into a country from a resource standpoint and people standpoint. But as we look at the longevity of the business and trying to keep it going for decades and generations into the future, having an international presence is another way you can kind of help fortify the business in a way, because something could happen here, bird flu or something that could take us down. If we've got enough growth and opportunities in other countries, we could weather some major issue that we could potentially have even here. So that's another growth opportunity. We feel like it's got a lot of potential.
Maybe one more
A
question.
couple over here, David.
Okay.
Yeah, hey, thank you both for your time. I can relate. I have a 10-year-old daughter who's in 3 sports, so we're constantly jumping around. But a special treat is always to go to Chick-fil-A for dinner after a game or something. Can you talk a little bit about, I'm fascinated when you see 20, 30 cars in a drive-through line, and the way, as a customer, you're going to get through it. You guys are so efficient at that. Americans, I don't know what it is, but you can see an empty restaurant and no one wants to get out of their car, but they know at Chick-fil-A you're gonna fly through it. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys have analyzed and perfected the drive-through experience when so many of your competitors struggle with that?
We spend a lot of time on it. We've got a big innovation center at our corporate office where we test and simulate things. So we'll build mock-up stores inside these big buildings and simulate with either golf carts or bicycles to get throughput. And we'll look at equipment and, of course, just the overall processes. So it is something we are continually pouring into and fine-tuning, because there's always improvement in ways you can save a second. One of it is you see with a lot of stores, we've got team members out taking orders in drive-through. And one of the pieces that's helpful is the distance between at the point at which that order is taken and the pickup point. The further out that is, it helps the kitchen so much on the throughput, so they can kind of keep it going. So if it's only ordered at the order box, which is somewhere typically in the 3 to 5 car stack range, that's going to make it much slower because it's going to make it more difficult. So it is funny how some of the, especially here recently, some of the articles are coming out. Chick-fil-A is the slowest, anyways, but they're making it from the point at which it's ordered until the point it's picked up. So ours are a lot of times, like you said, 20, 30 cars deep because we go way back to take those orders, but it does help the overall throughput. So there's always the way of just that innovation and continuing to reinvent yourself. We focus on.
Great. Maybe one more question, and then we'll close up.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Andrew. Just a question about the customer service that we've been talking about. And lately, since pandemic, it seems like airline customers probably been the most prominent example of just unruly customers in general. Has Chick-fil-A seen that, and how have you kind of responded to
Absolutely.
that?
It's been significant, especially I'd say over the last year in particular. Right as things kind of hit, there's a lot of extra patience because everybody was just trying to figure it out. But yeah, I mean it is across the board in all locations. Talking to them, customers are just they don't have the patience and just blowing up on all kind of not great situations happening. So it's made it more difficult with team members and stuff having to navigate those types of customers. So yeah, we've got plenty of our own stories of what you hear, like airlines and things having to deal with. But it's just that we look at isolation. So many people so isolated for so long. There's some negative ramifications to that, and I think it just pins up so many different emotions for people, and it doesn't take much to kind of just explode.
Well, hey, Andrew, I want to give you a minute to share some closing thoughts, but I'll just share, as you all are learning from Andrew's experience as a leader, how I've experienced Andrew as a leader, which is really inspiring being a staff member at Chick-fil-A, is Andrew's someone who's committed to growing in his faith. He's committed to serving his family, which is especially inspiring, and really committed to continue to grow as a leader and pursue wisdom. So I'm really grateful for that from you as a leader, and it's been a real privilege to be with you all. But any closing thoughts from you, Andrew, before we wrap up?
I'll build off on one of the things you said, just the family side. Is we're all in different businesses here, and whether you've got family or not, I'd say you got to make sure you keep a good balance too between work and professional life. And my wife and I are really diligent about, because as this came up, we started talking about this. Honestly, have not had any conversation about the CEO role until October of 2020, and we really wrestled through it on the personal side. I've seen what happens, and I've seen how the business can be a vortex, and know what that's like growing up, and just wanting to be careful. So we've been very, very intentional about trying to keep some parameters, and there's a lot of things I just won't do right now in the season that we are with kids, and I won't do speaking engagements on the weekends because we'll end up having some funerals or things that I'll need to attend with operators and staff to try to preserve that. When I'm in town, I try to do everything I can to be home by 6:30, 7 o'clock. And that gives me about an hour and a half with the kids before bedtime. I'll go in as early as people will meet. Some people will meet with at 6 o'clock if we need to. Happy to do it. But I'll do everything I can to get home to have that time. So we've put some things in that have really helped us to keep that kind of balance. But I would just encourage you to don't let whatever you're doing professionally be a vortex that just sucks everything out of you. You got to have some balance. I think it's so important.
That's great. Well, I know there's some free Chick-fil-A sandwich cards and maybe some other goodies on your way out, so make sure you get that. But what a privilege to be with everybody this morning. Thank you for being such an engaging audience, and go Dogs.
Thank you so much. This was such a great morning, and we appreciate Andrew and Michael, both of you all being here today. And I also wanted to thank Andrew and Chick-fil-A for all their support at Terry College and the Institute for Leadership Advancement. We are greatly honored with that and have been so appreciative. I also want to give you this token. It's our tradition to present keepsake for our Terry Thursday speakers. And so this is a glass sculpture created by Loretta Eby. Thank you so much. Yes, in addition to the Chick-fil-A treats, don't forget to pick up your parking validation also. Thank you.